Welcome to Forgotten Myths. Get comfortable. Adjust your pillow. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Tonight, we're going back, way back, to ancient Greece, but not the Greece you learned about in school, not the sanitized version with wise gods and noble heroes, not the Disney version, not the Hollywood version. The original myths were different. They were darker, stranger, more violent, more human. The gods you think you know, Zeus, Hera, Hades, they were not protectors. They were not kind. They were not wise father figures watching over humanity with gentle eyes. They were something else entirely. They were petty. They were jealous. They were cruel. They held grudges for centuries. They destroyed lives on a whim. They punished mortals for crimes that weren't crimes at all. They were, in many ways, monsters. Monsters wearing divine faces. And the ancient Greeks knew this. They didn't worship their gods because they loved them. They worshipped them because they feared them. Because ignoring a god was far more dangerous than honoring one. Tonight, we're telling their stories the way they were first told, the way ancient poets whispered them around fires, the way parents warned their children about the dangers of divine attention. These are the original myths, before anyone decided to make them safe. We'll begin with the king of the gods himself, the ruler of Olympus, the lord of thunder and lightning, Zeus. You think you know him, the powerful father figure, the protector of justice, the wise king who maintained order among gods and men. But the real Zeus, the Zeus of the original myths, was something far darker. He was a predator, a tyrant, a god who took whatever he wanted, whoever he wanted, and destroyed anyone who stood in his way. Let me tell you about the real king of the gods. Let's begin. To understand Zeus, we need to start before he was born, before the Olympians existed at all, back when the universe was ruled by older, darker powers, the Titans. In the beginning, there was chaos, a void, an emptiness, and from that emptiness emerged the first beings, Gaia, the earth, Uranus, the sky, and from their union came the Titans, 12 of them, giants of impossible power who ruled the cosmos before the gods, ever drew breath. The youngest of these, Titans, was Kronos, sometimes spelled Cronus, the Titan of time. Kronos was ambitious, cunning, and utterly ruthless. His father, Uranus, had imprisoned some of Gaia's other children deep within the earth. Monsters, creatures with 100 hands, cyclopes with single burning eyes. Uranus was afraid of them, disgusted by them. So he locked them away in Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld. Gaia never forgave him. She crafted a sickle, a great curved blade made of adamantine, the hardest substance in existence. And she asked her children, the Titans, to use it against their father. Only Kronos had the courage, or perhaps only Kronos had the cruelty. He waited until night, until Uranus came to lay with Gaia, as he did each evening when the sky meets the earth. And as his father descended, Kronos struck. He castrated his own father with that sickle, cut him, threw the severed pieces into the sea. From the blood that fell on the earth, the Furies were born, goddesses of vengeance. And from the flesh that fell into the ocean, Aphrodite rose, the goddess of love, born from violence and mutilation. Kronos took the throne. He became king of the cosmos. He freed some of his siblings, married his sister Rhea, and ruled over a golden age. But there was a problem, a prophecy. Just as Kronos had overthrown his father, so too would he be overthrown by his own child. One of his sons would rise against him, would defeat him, would take everything. Kronos could not accept this. He would not allow it. So he made a decision, a terrible decision. Every time Rhea gave birth, Kronos would take the baby. He would hold the newborn in his massive hands, look at it once, and then he would swallow it whole. Not kill, swallow. The children were immortal. They couldn't die. So they lived on inside their father's stomach, trapped, conscious, imprisoned in eternal darkness within the belly of a god. Hestia was first, the firstborn daughter, swallowed. Then Demeter, goddess of harvest, swallowed. Then Hera, swallowed. Then Hades, his first son, swallowed. Then Poseidon, swallowed. 5 children, 5 immortal beings, living inside their father for years, decades, unable to escape, unable to grow, unable to do anything but exist in that horrible darkness. Rhea was broken, desperate. When she became pregnant for the 6th time, she knew she couldn't watch it happen again. She couldn't hand over another child to that monstrous hunger. So she made a plan. When the time came to give birth, she fled to the island of Crete. There, in a hidden cave on Mount Ida, she delivered her 6th child, a boy, Zeus. She wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes, made it look like an infant, and she brought that stone back to Kronos. He didn't even look closely. He simply grabbed it and swallowed it whole, a rock, sitting in his stomach alongside his 5 divine children, and Kronos suspected nothing. Meanwhile, on Crete, the infant Zeus was hidden, raised in secret by nymphs, fed on honey and the milk of the divine goat Amalthea, guarded by warriors called the Curetes, who clashed their spears against their shields to drown out the sound of the baby's cries, so Kronos would never hear. Zeus grew. Unlike his siblings trapped in darkness, he grew strong. He grew cunning. He grew angry. And eventually, he grew into a god who wanted revenge. When Zeus reached adulthood, he left Crete. He knew what he had to do: free his siblings, overthrow his father, take the throne that the prophecy had promised him. But first, he needed to get close to Kronos. According to some versions of the myth, Zeus disguised himself as a cupbearer, a servant. He worked his way into his father's court, invisible, unremarkable. And when the moment was right, he slipped something into Kronos' drink, an emetic, a potion that would force the Titan to vomit. Kronos drank, and then he began to retch. First came the stone, the rock that Rhea had substituted for Zeus all those years ago. It flew from Kronos' mouth and landed at Delphi, where it would be worshipped for centuries as a sacred object. And then came the others: Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, Hestia. One by one they emerged, fully grown, fully divine, covered in the bile of their father's stomach but alive, free for the first time in their existence. And they were furious. What followed was war, the Titanomachy. Gods against titans, children against parents, a conflict that shook the foundations of the universe. Zeus led his siblings, but they needed more than just the 6 of them to defeat the Titans. So Zeus descended to Tartarus, the deepest pit of existence, and freed the creatures his grandfather Uranus had imprisoned. The Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, the Cyclops, masters of craft and fire. In gratitude, the Cyclops forged weapons for the gods. For Zeus, they made the thunderbolt, the most powerful weapon in existence. Pure lightning, shaped into a spear that could shatter mountains. For Poseidon, the trident. For Hades, the helm of darkness, which made the wearer invisible. Armed with these weapons, the gods went to war. The Titanomachy lasted 10 years. 10 years of battles that cracked the earth and boiled the seas. Mountains were thrown like stones. The sky itself caught fire. The noise of combat could be heard in every corner of the cosmos. In the end, the gods won. Zeus personally cast Kronos and many of the Titans into Tartarus, locked them away in the same pit where the Cyclopes had been imprisoned. Guarded by the 100-handed ones, who now served as eternal jailers. The old order was destroyed. The new order had begun. Zeus took the sky as his domain. Poseidon claimed the seas. Hades received the underworld, the realm of the dead. And Zeus became king of Olympus, king of the gods, ruler of all creation. He had won. The prophecy had been fulfilled. The son had overthrown the father. But here's the thing about Zeus. He wasn't better than Kronos. He wasn't kinder. He wasn't wiser. He was just stronger. Zeus as a ruler was not the benevolent father figure later myths would pretend. He was paranoid, controlling, tyrannical. He feared prophecies just as much as his father had. When he learned that his first wife, the Titaness Metis, was pregnant with a child who might surpass him, he didn't wait to see what would happen. He swallowed her, just like his father. He consumed Metis whole, absorbing her wisdom into himself. The child she carried, Athena, would eventually burst fully formed from Zeus's head. But Metis herself remained trapped inside him forever. Zeus had become the very thing he overthrew. But that wasn't the worst of it. Not even close. Let's talk about what Zeus is really famous for in the original myths. Not thunder, not justice, not ruling Olympus. Zeus is famous for his appetites, his insatiable, unstoppable, violent appetites. The myths are full of Zeus's love affairs. That's the polite term later scholars used. But let's be clear about what we're actually talking about. Zeus saw women he wanted, mortal women, goddesses, nymphs. It didn't matter, and he took them, sometimes through deception, sometimes through force, always without consent. The original myths do not romanticize this. They describe it in stark terms. Zeus pursued, Zeus tricked, Zeus attacked, and his victims suffered the consequences, while he moved on to the next conquest. Let me tell you about their stories. Europa was a Phoenician princess, beautiful, young, innocent. She was gathering flowers by the sea one day when she noticed a bull among her father's herd. But this was no ordinary bull. It was magnificent, pure white, gentle. Its horns shone like polished metal. It moved toward her slowly, calmly, and lay down at her feet. Europa was charmed. She stroked its flank. She placed flowers on its horns. And eventually, feeling safe, she climbed onto its back. The moment she did, the bull rose. It ran. Faster than any animal should. It plunged into the sea and began to swim, carrying Europa far from shore, far from her home, far from anyone who could help her. She clung to its horns, terrified, as the ocean passed beneath them. The bull was Zeus. Of course it was. He carried her to the island of Crete, and there, far from her family, far from her kingdom, with no one to protect her. He raped her. Europa never returned home. She bore Zeus 3 sons, including Minos, who would become king of Crete. The continent of Europe was named after her, but she never chose any of it. Leda was the queen of Sparta, wife of King Tyndareus. a mortal woman living a mortal life. Until Zeus noticed her. He didn't approach her as a man. He didn't approach her as a bull this time. No. Zeus transformed himself into a swan, a beautiful white swan fleeing from an eagle. Leda saw this swan in distress and took pity on it. She protected it, held it close to her body, and then the swan attacked her. Zeus, in the form of that bird, forced himself on Leda. From that assault, Leda produced 2 eggs, and from those eggs hatched 4 children, Castor and Pollux, Helen and Clytemnestra. Helen would later be called the most beautiful woman in the world. Her face would launch 1,000 ships and cause the Trojan War, all because a god disguised himself as a wounded bird to get close to a woman who showed him kindness. Danae was a princess of Argos, but her father had received a terrible prophecy. He would be killed by his own grandson. Danae's son would murder him. So he locked his daughter away, put her in a bronze chamber, underground, with no doors and no windows. A prison. No man could reach her. She would never bear a child. The prophecy would be thwarted. But Zeus was not a man. He transformed himself into golden rain, droplets of liquid gold that seeped through the cracks in the ceiling, through the bronze walls, into the chamber where Danae sat alone in the darkness. The golden rain fell on her, surrounded her, entered her, and she conceived a son, Perseus, the hero who would one day slay Medusa. And yes, he would eventually kill his grandfather, fulfilling the prophecy that Danae's imprisonment was meant to prevent. She was locked away to protect a man's future. And it didn't matter. Zeus found her anyway. Io was a priestess of Hera. Think about that. She served Zeus's wife directly. She had dedicated her life to the goddess of marriage. Zeus didn't care. He desired her. And so he took her. But this time, Hera almost caught him. She descended from Olympus unexpectedly, suspicious of her husband's absence. Zeus had only a moment to react. So he transformed Io into a cow, a white heifer. He pretended she was just an animal, nothing special, nothing to worry about. Hera wasn't fooled. She knew exactly what had happened. But instead of confronting Zeus directly, she asked for a gift. She asked to keep the cow. Zeus couldn't refuse, without revealing his guilt. So Io, still trapped in animal form, was given to Hera. The goddess set a guard over her, Argus Panoptes, a giant with 100 eyes. He watched Io constantly. He never slept, because only some of his eyes closed at any time. Io could not escape, could not speak, could not explain what had happened to her. She was trapped in the body of a cow, watched by a monster, punished for something that was done to her. Eventually, Zeus sent Hermes to kill Argus and free Io, but Hera's revenge wasn't finished. She sent a gadfly to torment Io, to sting her constantly, driving her mad with pain, forcing her to run endlessly across the world, never finding peace. Io wandered for years, through Europe, through Asia, across seas named after her passage, the Ionian Sea, the Bosphorus, which means cow crossing in Greek. Finally, in Egypt, Zeus restored her human form. She bore him a son, Epaphus. And her descendants would eventually include Heracles and Perseus. But Io herself had lost years of her life, had been stripped of her humanity, had been tormented across continents, because Zeus wanted her for an afternoon. Callisto was a nymph, a follower of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. She had sworn an oath of virginity. She had dedicated her life to chastity, to the wilderness, to her goddess. Zeus wanted her anyway. But Callisto would never have accepted a man's advances. She had rejected that life entirely. So Zeus didn't come to her as a man. He came to her disguised as Artemis herself. Callisto trusted her goddess completely. When Artemis approached her, she felt safe. When Artemis embraced her, she suspected nothing. And then Zeus revealed himself. By then, it was too late. Callisto became pregnant. She tried to hide it, but eventually Artemis discovered the truth. The goddess felt betrayed. She didn't know about Zeus's deception. She only knew that Callisto had broken her oath. Artemis expelled Callisto from her band of hunters. Then Hera got involved. Zeus's wife transformed Callisto into a bear, a wild animal wandering alone in the forest. Years later, Callisto's own son, Arcas, now a young man, was hunting in those woods. He saw the bear. He raised his spear. He didn't recognize his mother. Zeus intervened at the last second. He turned them both into constellations. Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the great bear and the little bear. Even now, they circle the night sky. Callisto, frozen forever in animal form. Her son, forever chasing her without knowing who she is. That was Zeus's idea of mercy. These aren't isolated incidents. The myths contain dozens of similar stories. Semele, who Zeus destroyed by showing her his true form. Alcmene, mother of Heracles, tricked when Zeus disguised himself as her husband. Ganymede, a young boy whom Zeus abducted to serve as his cupbearer on Olympus. Zeus saw, Zeus wanted, Zeus took, and the victims bore the consequences. Hera's jealousy, social ruin, transformation into animals, death, while Zeus simply returned to Olympus, untouchable, unpunished, ready for his next conquest. This was the king of the gods. But Zeus's cruelty wasn't limited to his appetites. He was also famous for his punishments. And those punishments were designed to last forever. Take Prometheus. Prometheus was a titan, but he had sided with Zeus during the war against Kronos. He was clever, perhaps the cleverest being in existence. And he cared about humanity in a way the gods never did. When Zeus decided to withhold fire from mortals, leaving them cold and helpless in the darkness, Prometheus disagreed. He stole fire from Olympus, carried it down to earth in a hollow fennel stalk, gave it to humanity as a gift. Zeus was furious. Fire was divine. It belonged to the gods, and Prometheus had given it away without permission. The punishment was designed to be eternal. Zeus had Prometheus chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains. Every day an eagle would descend. It would land on his chest and tear into his flesh. It would eat his liver slowly while Prometheus screamed, and every night his liver would regenerate. It would grow back completely, so that in the morning the eagle could return and feast again. This continued for thousands of years. Some myths say 30,000 years. Every single day, the same agony, the same eagle, the same tearing of flesh, the same knowledge that tomorrow would be identical. Prometheus never regretted what he did. He had helped humanity. That was enough. But Zeus never forgave him. Sisyphus was a king of Corinth, clever like Prometheus, too clever for his own good. He cheated death twice. He tricked the gods themselves, including Zeus. When Zeus came to punish him, Sisyphus tried to bargain, tried to talk his way out. It almost worked, but eventually death caught him. And Zeus assigned his eternal punishment, a boulder, a hill. Sisyphus must push a massive stone up a steep hill. This takes all his strength, all his concentration. He pushes and strains and struggles, inch by inch, until finally Finally, he reaches the top, and then the boulder rolls back down. Every time, without exception. He can never keep it at the summit. He can never rest. He must descend and begin again, forever, pushing, climbing, failing, repeating, for eternity. Tantalus was another king. He had been favored by the gods, allowed to dine with them on Olympus itself. But he abused their trust. He stole divine food. He revealed their secrets to mortals. And worst of all, he committed an unspeakable act. He killed his own son, Pelops, cut him into pieces, cooked him, and served him to the gods at a banquet to test whether they could tell the difference between divine food and human flesh. The gods knew immediately, all except Demeter, who was distracted by grief and accidentally ate a piece of shoulder. Pelops was restored to life, but Tantalus was cast into the underworld. His punishment was simple. He stands in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree. He is eternally hungry, eternally thirsty. When he bends to drink, the water recedes. It drains away before his lips can touch it. When he reaches for fruit, the branches rise. They lift the food just beyond his grasp. He can see what he needs. He can almost touch it. But he can never, ever have it. Forever. This was Zeus. This was the king of the gods. Not a wise father. Not a protector of justice. Not a benevolent ruler watching over his creation with gentle concern. He was a survivor of divine violence who became a perpetrator of divine violence. He was a predator who used his power to take whatever he wanted. He was a tyrant who punished disobedience with eternal torment. He feared prophecy just like his father. He consumed those who threatened him just like his father. He ruled through fear just like his father. The only difference was that Zeus was better at it, more powerful, more cunning, and he made sure no one could do to him what he had done to Kronos. That's the real Zeus. The Zeus they didn't teach you about. The Zeus that ancient Greeks actually worshipped, not out of love, but out of terror. Because when gods behave like monsters, the only safe response is to kneel. Zeus ruled Olympus with thunder and terror. He took who he wanted, destroyed who he pleased, and no one could stop him. But there was one god who watched his every betrayal, one god who suffered each time he transformed into a bull, a swan, a shower of gold, one god who knew every single name, every single victim, every single lie. His wife, Hera, queen of the gods, goddess of marriage, protector of wives and families, married to the greatest destroyer of marriages in existence, you might expect her story to be one of sorrow, of quiet suffering, of a victim trapped in an impossible situation. But that's not who Hera was. Hera didn't cry. Hera didn't accept. Hera didn't forgive. Hera raged. And her rage was legendary. She couldn't punish Zeus. He was too powerful. But his victims, his lovers, his children, they were not. Let me tell you what happened to those who caught Zeus's eye. Let me tell you about Hera's wrath. Hera. Even her name carries weight. In ancient Greek, it may have meant lady or mistress. Some scholars connect it to the word for hero, others to the word for season or year. But whatever her name meant, everyone knew what she represented: marriage, family, the sacred bond between husband and wife, the stability of the household, the protection of women in childbirth. Hera was worshipped across Greece. Temples rose in her honor, festivals celebrated her power. Brides prayed to her before their weddings. Wives called on her when their husbands strayed. She was the goddess you wanted on your side when it came to matters of the heart and home. And yet, Hera herself had the worst marriage in all of mythology. Her husband was Zeus, the serial predator, the god who couldn't remain faithful for a single century, the king who saw marriage vows as suggestions that applied to everyone except himself. Every time Zeus took another lover, Hera knew. Every time he transformed into an animal to deceive some poor woman, Hera watched. Every time a new demigod was born from one of his affairs, Hera counted. She was the goddess of marriage, married to its greatest enemy. And that contradiction, that impossible, humiliating, eternal contradiction, it twisted her. It made her into something else entirely. But let's start at the beginning. How did Hera end up married to Zeus in the first place? The myths offer different versions, but the most common one is not a love story. It's a trap. Hera was one of the 6 children of Kronos and Rhea. Like her siblings, she was swallowed by her father at birth. Like her siblings, she spent years imprisoned in that dark belly. And like her siblings, she was freed when Zeus forced Kronos to regurgitate his children. After the war against the Titans, after Zeus claimed the throne, he set his sights on Hera. She was beautiful. That much was universally acknowledged. The most beautiful of the goddesses, some said. Her eyes were described as ox-eyed in Homer, which sounds strange to modern ears, but was actually high praise. Large, deep, luminous eyes. Zeus wanted her. Of course he did. But Hera refused him. She knew what he was. She had already seen him pursue other goddesses, other nymphs. She had no interest in becoming another conquest, another name on his list. So she said no. And Zeus didn't accept rejection. He tried multiple times. Gifts, promises, declarations of love. Hera remained unmoved. She had sworn herself to virginity, some myths say. She wanted no part of marriage, least of all to a god who couldn't keep his hands to himself. So Zeus decided to use deception. One day, Hera was walking alone. A storm arose out of nowhere. Rain poured down. Thunder shook the sky. And in the chaos of the storm, a small bird appeared. A cuckoo. It was wet, shivering, clearly in distress. It flew to Hera and landed in her lap, trembling against the cold. Hera felt pity for the creature. She held it close to her chest to warm it. She covered it with her hands, protecting it from the rain. She showed it kindness. And then the cuckoo transformed. Suddenly, she wasn't holding a bird. She was holding Zeus, his arms around her, his body pressed against hers, too close to escape. What happened next? The myths describe in careful language, but we know what it means. Zeus took what he wanted, as he always did. And afterward, Hera was faced with an impossible choice. In ancient Greek society, a woman who had been compromised was ruined. Even a goddess. The shame was inescapable. The only way to restore honor was marriage. So Hera married her rapist. She married the bird that had pretended to need her help. She married the storm that had cornered her. She married the god who couldn't take no for an answer. And she was expected to be grateful for it. Their wedding was celebrated across Olympus. The first divine marriage, a union of the 2 most powerful gods. It should have been glorious. The honeymoon, according to myth, lasted 300 years. 3 centuries of apparent bliss, hidden away on the island of Samos. But even that was a lie. Zeus was already unfaithful before those 300 years ended. Perhaps he was unfaithful during them. The myths don't say for certain. But we know that by the time Hera took her place as Queen of Olympus, her husband was already pursuing others. And he never stopped. So what do you do when you're a goddess trapped in an unbreakable marriage to a god who humiliates you constantly? What do you do when you're the divine protector of marriage, but your own marriage is a farce? What do you do when you can't leave, can't divorce, can't even publicly criticize your husband without risking his wrath? Hera found an answer. If she couldn't punish Zeus, she would punish everyone around him. His lovers, his children, anyone who reminded her of his betrayals. She couldn't touch the king, so she destroyed the pawns. Remember Io, the priestess who served in Hera's own temple? Zeus assaulted her. Then, to hide his crime, he transformed her into a white cow. Hera wasn't fooled. She knew exactly what had happened. She knew that innocent-looking heifer was the woman her husband had just violated. But instead of confronting Zeus, instead of raging at the god who deserved her anger, Hera asked for a gift. "What a lovely cow," she said sweetly. "Give her to me." Zeus couldn't refuse without admitting his guilt. So he handed Io over, and then Hera's revenge began. She set Argus Panoptes to guard Io. Argus, the giant with 100 eyes. He never slept completely. Some of his eyes were always open, always watching. Io couldn't escape, couldn't transform back, couldn't tell anyone what had happened to her. She was trapped in animal form, watched by a monster, completely alone. Zeus eventually sent Hermes to kill Argus. The messenger god played music until all 100 eyes finally closed, then cut off the giant's head. But Hera wasn't finished. She took Argus's 100 eyes and placed them on the tail of the peacock, her sacred animal, a memorial to her watchful servant. And for Io, she created something worse than captivity, a gadfly, a stinging insect that would follow Io wherever she went. It would bite her constantly, drive her mad with pain, force her to run endlessly, never resting, never finding peace. Io wandered the earth for years, across continents, across oceans. The Ionian Sea is named for her passage. The Bosphorus, the cows crossing, marks where she swam. She ran and ran and ran, tormented by that fly, until finally, in Egypt, Zeus restored her human form. But those years of suffering, those were Hera's doing, not Zeus's punishment. Hera's. The victim was punished for the crime committed against her. Callisto's fate was even worse. You remember her story. Zeus disguised himself as Artemis to get close to her, raped her while wearing her goddess's face. When Callisto became pregnant, she tried to hide it. But eventually, Artemis discovered the truth during a bath. She saw Callisto's swollen belly and felt betrayed. Artemis didn't know about Zeus's deception. She only knew that her follower, who had sworn virginity, was pregnant. She expelled Callisto from her band of hunters, cast her out in disgrace. And then Hera intervened. She transformed Callisto into a bear, a wild animal, no longer human, no longer able to speak or explain what had happened to her. Callisto wandered the forests for years, alone, afraid, unable to communicate with anyone. Her son, Arcas, grew up without knowing what had happened to his mother. He became a hunter, a good one. One day, he was tracking through the woods when he saw a bear, a large bear that seemed to recognize him, that moved toward him almost lovingly. Arcas didn't understand. He saw a wild animal approaching. He raised his spear. He was about to kill his own mother. Zeus intervened at the last moment. He transformed them both into constellations, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the Great Bear and the Little Bear, Some call this mercy. But think about what it actually means. Callisto is frozen forever in animal form. Her son circles her in the sky, never knowing who she is. They are together, but eternally separated, close, but never able to touch. And Hera? Hera wasn't even satisfied with this. According to some myths, she went to the sea gods Oceanus and Tethys, who had raised her as a child. She asked them for one more punishment. She asked that Callisto's constellation never be allowed to set below the horizon, never be allowed to sink into the ocean and rest. And so Ursa Major circles the North Pole endlessly. It never sets. It never rests. It never finds peace. Even in the stars, Callisto cannot escape Hera's wrath. Semele was a princess of Thebes, beautiful, mortal, doomed. Zeus fell in love with her, or at least he desired her. He visited her in secret, always disguised, always hidden. She knew her lover was divine, but she had never seen his true form. Hera learned of the affair, and this time she decided to destroy the woman through her own desires. She disguised herself as an old woman, a nurse, a trusted advisor. She befriended Semele, gained her confidence, and then she planted a seed of doubt. "Are you sure your lover is really Zeus?" Hera whispered. "How do you know he's not some lesser spirit pretending to be the king of gods? If he truly loved you, he would show you his real form. He would prove himself." The doubt took root. Semele began to wonder. Was her lover really who he claimed to be? The next time Zeus visited, Semele made a request. She asked him to swear on the river Styx that he would grant her one wish, anything she asked. Zeus agreed. An oath on the Styx was unbreakable, even for gods. He loved her. He wanted to make her happy. What could she possibly ask that would be a problem? "Show me your true form," Semele said. "Appear to me as you appear to Hera. Let me see you as you really are." Zeus begged her to choose something else, anything else, but she insisted, and he had sworn. So Zeus revealed himself. His true form was too much for mortal eyes. He was lightning incarnate, pure divine energy, unbearable radiance. Semele burst into flames. She died instantly, burned alive by the sight of her lover's true face, but she was pregnant. And Zeus, acting quickly, cut the unborn child from her womb and sewed it into his own thigh. There, the baby continued to develop until it was ready to be born. That child was Dionysus, the god of wine, the twice-born. Hera hadn't killed the baby, but she had killed the mother, tricked a woman into asking for her own death, and she felt no remorse. Leto was a Titaness, one of the old gods who had not fought against Zeus in the war. She was gentle, kind, unassuming. Zeus seduced her. She became pregnant with twins. When Hera discovered this, her rage was absolute. Another affair, another pregnancy, another humiliation. She couldn't kill Leto directly, but she could make her suffer. Hera decreed that Leto could not give birth on any land, not on any continent, not on any island, nowhere that was rooted to the earth. Leto wandered the world in agony. Her labor pains had begun. The twins were ready to be born, but every place she tried to rest, the earth itself rejected her. Gaia, the earth goddess, had been warned by Hera. No land would accept Leto. She wandered for days, weeks, in constant pain, unable to deliver, unable to rest, unable to find a single place that would let her lie down. Finally, she found Delos, a tiny island that was not truly rooted to the earth. It floated, it drifted. It was, technically, not land in the way Hera had defined it. Delos agreed to let Leto give birth. But even then, Hera wasn't finished. She forbade Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, from attending Leto. Without Eileithyia, the birth could not happen. Leto suffered in labor for 9 days and 9 nights, unable to deliver, screaming in agony. The other goddesses eventually bribed Eileithyia to come. They offered her a golden necklace. Finally, she defied Hera and traveled to Delos. Leto gave birth to twins. First Artemis, goddess of the hunt, then Apollo, god of light and music, 2 of the most important gods in the Greek pantheon. Born despite Hera's cruelty, born because their mother endured suffering that would have broken anyone else. But Hera never forgave Leto, never forgave Artemis, never forgave Apollo. Her grudge lasted for eternity. Echo was a nymph, a mountain spirit known for her beautiful voice and her love of conversation. She could talk for hours about anything and nothing. Zeus used this. He would often visit the mountains to pursue nymphs, and when Hera came looking for him, Zeus would send Echo to intercept her, to distract her, to keep her talking while Zeus escaped. Echo would chatter endlessly, stories, questions, compliments, anything to keep Hera occupied. Eventually, Hera realized what was happening. She realized that this talkative nymph was helping her husband escape, covering for his affairs, making a fool of her. The punishment was elegant in its cruelty. Hera cursed Echo's voice. The nymph could no longer speak freely. She could only repeat the last words someone else had spoken. Her beautiful voice, her endless conversation, her very identity, all of it was gone. She could only echo. Later, Echo fell in love with a beautiful young man named Narcissus. But she couldn't tell him, couldn't express her feelings, could only repeat his words back to him. He rejected her, confused, annoyed by this strange woman who only repeated what he said. Echo faded away. Her body disappeared, only her voice remained. Even now, in mountains and canyons, you can hear her, repeating, echoing, forever unable to say what she truly means, all because she helped Zeus escape his wife. Lamia was a queen of Libya, beautiful, powerful, and unfortunately, noticed by Zeus. He had an affair with her. She bore him children, multiple children, some myths say. Hera discovered it, and her revenge was unlike anything else in mythology. She killed Lamia's children, every single one, slaughtered them while Lamia watched. Some versions say Hera forced Lamia to eat her own offspring. Others say she simply murdered them and left their bodies for Lamia to find. The grief drove Lamia insane. But Hera wasn't done. She cursed Lamia so she could never close her eyes, never sleep, never escape from the images of her dead children. Every time she tried to rest, she would see them, their faces, their bodies, their deaths. Lamia went mad, completely, utterly mad, and in her madness she became a monster. She began hunting other women's children, stealing them, devouring them. If she couldn't have her own children, no one could. Lamia became a figure of terror in Greek mythology, a bogeyman, a demon that mothers warned their children about. Behave, or Lamia will come for you. But Lamia hadn't started as a monster. She had been a queen, a mother. She had been destroyed by Hera's jealousy, broken so completely that she became the very thing she had suffered from. Zeus moved on to his next affair. Hera moved on to her next victim, and Lamia haunted the darkness forever. But of all Hera's victims, none suffered more than Heracles, or as the Romans called him, Hercules, the greatest hero in Greek mythology. the strongest man who ever lived, the demigod who completed the 12 labors and eventually earned his place among the gods. His entire life was defined by Hera's hatred. It started before he was even born. Alcmena was a mortal woman married to Amphitryon, a general of Thebes. She was faithful, virtuous, everything a Greek wife was supposed to be. Zeus wanted her anyway. He waited until Amphitryon was away at war, then he disguised himself as her husband. He came to her bed wearing Amphitryon's face, speaking with his voice, moving like him, acting like him. Alcmene had no idea. She thought she was with her husband. She welcomed him. Zeus extended that night to 3 times its normal length. The sun didn't rise for hours beyond when it should have, and in that extended darkness, Alcmene conceived. When the real Amphitryon returned the next day, Alcmene was confused. He had just been there, hadn't he? They had just spent the night together. Amphitryon was confused too. He had been at war. He couldn't have been with her. Eventually, the prophet Tiresias revealed the truth. Zeus had visited Alcmene. She was carrying a divine child. Hera was furious. Another bastard. Another reminder of Zeus's endless betrayals. Another demigod to mock her position as queen. She decided that this one would suffer more than any other. When Alcmene went into labor, Hera intervened. She sent Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, to delay the delivery. Eileithyia sat outside Alcmene's chamber, with her legs crossed and her hands clasped. As long as she held that position, the baby couldn't be born. Alcmene screamed, labored, suffered. For 7 days and 7 nights, she couldn't deliver. The pain was excruciating. The child couldn't emerge. Meanwhile, Hera had extracted a promise from Zeus. He had foolishly boasted that the next child, born of his bloodline, would rule over all those around him. Hera made him swear to it. Then she rushed the birth of another child. Eurystheus, a cousin of Heracles, also descended from Zeus. She made sure Eurystheus was born first, before Heracles could emerge. When Heracles was finally born, the oath was already sealed. He would not rule. He would serve. He would be subject to Eurystheus, a weaker, more cowardly man. His destiny had been stolen before he drew his first breath. But Hera wasn't satisfied with ruining his future. She wanted him dead. When Heracles was still an infant, lying in his crib, Hera sent 2 massive serpents. They slithered into the nursery in the dead of night. They coiled around the baby. Their fangs dripped venom. They prepared to strike. And the baby grabbed them, one in each tiny hand. He squeezed. When Alcmene and Amphitryon rushed in, they found their infant son holding 2 dead snakes, having strangled them with his bare hands. He was strong, impossibly strong, and Hera realized that killing him wouldn't be easy. So she changed tactics. If she couldn't kill him quickly, she would destroy him slowly. She would make his life an endless parade of suffering. Heracles grew up. He married a woman named Megara. They had children. He was happy. Hera couldn't allow that. She struck him with madness, divine insanity. A fog descended on his mind. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know who was in front of him. He saw enemies everywhere, threats, attackers. He had to defend himself. He had to fight. When the madness cleared, Heracles found himself standing over the bodies of his wife and children. He had killed them with his own hands. The hands that had strangled serpents in his crib had murdered his family. He hadn't known. He couldn't remember. But they were dead, and he had done it. The grief nearly destroyed him. He wanted to die. He saw no reason to continue living. But the oracle at Delphi gave him another option: penance, service. If he served King Eurystheus and completed whatever tasks were assigned to him, he could cleanse his soul. He could atone. And so began the 12 labors. The 12 labors were impossible tasks, things that should have killed any man, things designed to kill Heracles, slay the Nemean lion whose hide couldn't be pierced by any weapon, kill the Lernaean hydra, a monster with 9 heads that grew 2 more whenever one was cut off, capture the golden hind of Artemis without harming it, capture the Erymanthian boar alive, clean the Augean stables, which held thousands of cattle and hadn't been cleaned in 30 years, slay the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with beaks of bronze, capture the Cretan bull, steal the mares of Diomedes, horses that ate human flesh, obtain the belt of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, steal the cattle of Geryon, a 3-bodied giant, steal the golden apples of the Hesperides, guarded by a dragon that never slept, capture Cerberus, the 3-headed hound of Hades, and bring him to the surface. 12 tasks. Each one should have been fatal. Each one was designed by Eurystheus, with Hera's guidance, to finally kill the hero she hated so much. Heracles completed them all, every single one, through strength, through cleverness, through sheer determination. He fought monsters, outsmarted gods, descended to the underworld, and returned. And still, Hera wasn't satisfied. She plagued him throughout his life. More madness, more suffering, more obstacles. Even after the labors were complete, she never stopped. Heracles eventually died. Not from Hera's schemes directly, but from the poisoned blood of a centaur, which his wife accidentally used on his clothing. The pain was unbearable. The poison burned through his skin, fusing the cloth to his flesh. He couldn't remove it. He could only suffer. In the end, he built his own funeral pyre. He lay down on it and had it lit. He chose to burn rather than continue living in agony. And as the flames consumed him, something unexpected happened. His mortal flesh burned away, but his divine half, the part of him that came from Zeus, rose to Olympus. Heracles became a god, and Hera finally made peace with him. She adopted him as her own son. She gave him her daughter Hebe as a wife. The hatred that had defined his entire existence simply ended. Some see this as reconciliation, as growth, as Hera finally letting go of her anger. But think about what it actually means. She tormented him for his entire mortal life. She drove him mad, made him kill his family, forced him into servitude, sent monsters and curses and obstacles to destroy him, and only after he died, only after he had suffered everything she could inflict, only then did she accept him. His entire human existence was defined by her cruelty, and in the end, she got what she wanted. He was no longer a reminder of Zeus's affair. He was a god now, part of the divine order, properly assimilated. The mortal taint was burned away. This was Hera, goddess of marriage, protector of wives, queen of Olympus, and destroyer of innocent women. She couldn't punish Zeus. He was too powerful, too protected, too essential to the order of the cosmos. So she punished everyone else instead. The women he raped, the children he fathered, the mortals who had no way to refuse a god. They suffered for crimes that were committed against them. They paid the price for Zeus's appetites. Io was transformed into a cow and tormented for years. Callisto was turned into a bear and nearly killed by her own son. Semele was tricked into her own death. Leto wandered in agony, unable to give birth. Echo lost her voice forever. Lamia lost her children, her sanity, and her humanity. Heracles lost his family, his freedom, and his peace, all because Hera couldn't direct her rage at the one who deserved it. She was a victim, too. That's the tragedy. She was trapped in a marriage she never wanted, bound to a husband who humiliated her constantly, forced to smile and play the part of the perfect queen while her heart turned to stone. But victimhood doesn't excuse cruelty. Suffering doesn't justify inflicting suffering on others. Hera had choices. She could have helped Zeus's victims, protected them, sided with them against the god who had wronged them both. Instead, she destroyed them. She became the very thing she should have stood against. A woman who hurt other women, a goddess of marriage who shattered families, a queen whose legacy was built on the suffering of the innocent. That's the tragedy of Hera. Not that she was wronged, but that she let that wrong transform her into a monster. Zeus was a predator. Hera was a destroyer. Together, they ruled Olympus with desire and vengeance. But there was one god who stayed away from these games, one god who never visited Olympus unless absolutely necessary, who never chased mortals, who never schemed or manipulated, one god who was given the worst domain of all and simply accepted it. Hades, lord of the underworld, king of the dead, ruler of everything that lies beneath. You might think his story would be the darkest of all. A god of death, surrounded by the souls of the departed, sitting on a throne of shadow. But here's the strange thing about Hades. Of all the Olympian gods, he might have been the most honest, the most fair, the most stable. He didn't lie. He didn't trick. He kept his word absolutely. He just happened to rule over death. And he did something that the myths have never quite forgiven him for. Something that defined his existence and haunted a young goddess for eternity. He fell in love. And he took what he wanted. Just once. Let me tell you about Hades and Persephone. Let me tell you about the girl who picked flowers and ended up a queen. Hades. The very name made ancient Greeks uncomfortable. They avoided saying it directly. They called him the Rich One, Pluton in Greek, which became Pluto in Latin, or the Hospitable One, or the Unseen, anything to avoid attracting his attention, because Hades ruled over something that no one could escape. Not heroes, not kings, not even gods in a sense. Everything that lived would eventually enter his domain. Death, the underworld, the place where all souls went when their time on earth was done. But here's what most people get wrong about Hades. He wasn't evil. He wasn't a devil figure. He wasn't the Greek Satan, tempting mortals to sin. He was simply inevitable. Death isn't good or evil. It just is. And Hades embodied that truth. He didn't chase souls. He didn't kill people before their time. He simply received them when they arrived. He was the god of what comes after. And unlike his brothers, unlike Zeus with his endless affairs and Poseidon with his raging storms, Hades was quiet, patient, constant. He sat on his throne of black stone and waited. Because everyone eventually came to him. Let's go back to the beginning, to when the world was divided. After the Titans were defeated, The three sons of Kronos needed to divide the cosmos between them: Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, the sky, the sea, and everything below. They drew lots. Random chance would decide who ruled what. Zeus drew the sky, the highest realm, the seat of power, thunder and lightning and the throne of Olympus. Poseidon drew the sea, the vast oceans, the crushing depths, earthquakes and storms and the creatures of the deep. Hades drew what was left: the underworld. Some say he was cheated. Some say Zeus rigged the draw. But Hades accepted his lot without complaint. That was his nature. He didn't argue. He didn't rebel. He simply took what was given to him and made it his own. He descended into the earth, down past the roots of mountains, down past the rivers of the living world, down into the darkness where no sun had ever shone. And there he built his kingdom. The Greek underworld was not hell, not in the Christian sense. It wasn't a place of punishment for sinners. It was simply the place where the dead went. All the dead, good and evil alike. But it wasn't a single place. It was a geography, a landscape of the afterlife with distinct regions and features. First, there were the rivers. 5 rivers separated the world of the living from the world of the dead. The Styx was the most famous, the river of hatred. Souls crossed it to enter the underworld properly. Gods swore their most binding oaths on its waters. To break a promise sworn on the Styx meant even divine punishment. The Acheron was the river of pain. Some myths say this was the actual boundary that Charon ferried souls across. The Lethe was the river of forgetfulness. Souls who drank from it lost all memory of their living days. Some drank willingly, wanting to forget. Others were required to drink before being reincarnated. The Phlegethon was the river of fire. It flowed with flames instead of water, leading down to the deepest pits of the underworld. And the Cocytus was the river of lamentation. Its waters were made of the tears of the damned. The wailing of the suffering souls echoed from its banks. These 5 rivers formed a boundary, a threshold. Once you crossed them, you were truly dead. The living world was behind you forever. At the boundary stood Charon, the ferryman. He was ancient, older than the Olympians. Some say he was a son of primordial darkness itself. He appeared as an old man, bent and weathered, with eyes that had seen every soul who ever died. He piloted a small boat across the river, just large enough for himself and his passengers. But his service wasn't free. The dead needed to pay. 1 obol, a small coin. That was the fare. And if you couldn't pay, if no one had placed a coin on your tongue or over your eyes when you were buried, Charon would not take you. You would be stranded, wandering the near shore for 100 years, neither fully dead nor allowed to pass on. A ghost, a shade, caught between worlds. This is why the Greeks were so careful about burial rites, why leaving a body unburied was such a terrible crime. Without proper burial, without that coin, the soul was lost. The dead crowded the banks, the freshly deceased, the long forgotten, all waiting for the ferryman's boat. Charon would extend his withered hand. You would place the coin in his palm, and then, slowly, silently, he would row you across. No turning back. On the far shore, another guardian waited. Cerberus, the hound of Hades, the 3-headed dog. Some myths say he had 50 heads. Others say 100. But the most common image is 3. 3 massive heads, each with jaws that could crush bones, with teeth like swords, with eyes that saw everything. His tail was a living serpent. His mane was made of snakes. When he barked, it was said the sound could stop a heart. Cerberus had one job: let the dead enter. Let no one leave. Souls passed by him without fear. He was not there to harm them, but if anyone tried to escape, tried to return to the living world, then those 3 heads would turn, those jaws would open. Very few ever got past Cerberus. Orpheus did, with his music. Heracles did, with his strength. Aeneas did, with the help of a sibyl. But for ordinary souls, there was no escape. Cerberus made sure of that. Beyond Cerberus lay the fields of Asphodel. This was where most souls ended up. Not the heroic, not the villainous. Just ordinary people who lived ordinary lives. The fields stretched endlessly, gray, flat, covered in pale flowers called asphodels. The souls wandered here, barely conscious, barely remembering who they had been. They weren't in pain, but they weren't at peace either. They simply existed. Shadows of who they once were, going through motions without meaning. This was the default afterlife, the place where forgetting happened slowly, where identity faded, where eternity stretched on without purpose. For the ancient Greeks, this was almost more frightening than punishment. At least punishment meant you mattered. The fields of asphodel meant you didn't. But not everyone went to the fields. Those who had lived exceptionally good lives, those who had been heroes, those who had been loved by the gods. They went somewhere else. Elysium, the Elysian fields. This was paradise. Green meadows, golden light, eternal spring. The air was sweet. The rivers ran clear. Music played, though no instruments were visible. Here, the blessed dead lived in joy. They feasted. They danced. They reunited with loved ones. They remembered who they were and were happy to remember. Some myths say Elysium was located at the edge of the world. Others say it was a separate realm, within the underworld. But everyone agreed on one thing. Very few souls ever reached it. You had to be exceptional, or exceptionally lucky, or exceptionally favored by the gods. For everyone else, the gray fields waited. And then there was Tartarus, below everything, below the fields, below Elysium, below the rivers, so far down that an anvil dropped from the surface would fall for 9 days before hitting its floor. Tartarus was a prison, a pit, a place of eternal punishment for those who had truly earned divine wrath. The Titans were imprisoned there after their defeat, chained in darkness, guarded by the 100-handed ones who never slept, and certain mortals joined them. Those who had offended the gods so deeply that ordinary death wasn't enough. Sisyphus was there, pushing his boulder. Tantalus was there, reaching for fruit he could never taste. Ixion was there, bound to a flaming wheel that spun forever. The Danaïdes were there, 49 sisters who had murdered their husbands on their wedding night. Their punishment, to fill a bathtub with water using only leaky jars. An impossible task, eternal frustration. Tartarus wasn't just death, it was suffering, designed suffering, punishment crafted specifically for each crime, lasting forever. Even the gods feared Tartarus. Even they didn't go there willingly. And at the center of it all, ruling over this vast geography of the dead, sat Hades. His palace was made of black stone. Some say obsidian, some say cold iron. The pillars were carved with scenes of mortality. The walls remembered every soul who had ever passed through. Hades sat on his throne, and beside him sat an empty throne, waiting. He had ruled alone for eons. He had watched Zeus take wife after wife, lover after lover. He had watched Poseidon father children on nymphs and mortals. He had watched the gods of Olympus live their dramatic, passionate, chaotic lives. And he had sat in silence, in the dark, surrounded by the dead. Perhaps he was content. Perhaps the underworld was enough. But one day something changed. One day Hades rose from his throne, mounted his chariot pulled by black horses, and descended to the surface world. He had seen something, someone, and for the first time in his existence, the Lord of the Dead wanted something that was alive. Her name was Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, daughter of Zeus, king of the gods. She was young, beautiful, innocent. She spent her days in meadows, gathering flowers with the nymphs, laughing in the sunlight, knowing nothing of death or darkness. She was spring itself, growth, life, renewal, everything Hades was not. Perhaps that was why he wanted her. Perhaps surrounded by shadows, he longed for light. Perhaps ruling the dead, he yearned for something alive. The myths don't tell us exactly when Hades first saw her, or how. Did he rise to the surface and glimpse her from afar? Did someone tell him of her beauty? Did Zeus, her own father, suggest her as a bride? Some versions say Zeus gave his blessing, that he promised Persephone to Hades without telling Demeter, that he approved of the match in secret. Others say Hades simply took her, no permission asked, no blessing sought. Either way, what happened next was the same. The day was ordinary. Persephone was in a meadow in Sicily. Or perhaps it was Eleusis, or the plain of Enna. The myths disagree on the location, but they agree on what she was doing, picking flowers, roses, hyacinths, violets, crocuses. She wandered through the field, adding to her basket, enjoying the warmth of the sun. And then she saw something unusual, a narcissus flower, but not an ordinary one. This one was magnificent, 100 blooms growing from a single root, impossibly beautiful. It shone in the sunlight like it was made of gold. Persephone had never seen anything like it. She reached for it. Some say the flower was a trap, that Zeus had planted it there to lure her, that Gaia, the earth itself, had grown it at Zeus's request. A divine conspiracy to deliver the girl to Hades. Others say it was simply chance, wrong place, wrong time, wrong flower. The moment her fingers touched the stem, the earth split open, a massive chasm, a crack in the world. From it came darkness and cold, and the sound of horses screaming. And from that darkness emerged a chariot, black horses with eyes like fire, a golden chariot that shone even in shadow, and holding the reins, a figure in dark robes, a crown on his head, his face grim and determined. Hades. He seized her, one arm around her waist, pulling her into the chariot. She screamed, she fought, she called for her mother, for Zeus, for anyone who could hear. But the chariot was already descending. The crack in the earth was closing, the sunlight was fading, and Persephone, goddess of spring, found herself being dragged into the kingdom of the dead. The world felt her absence immediately. Quand? Moment. The meadow was full of warmth and flowers. The next, a chill passed through. The flowers wilted. The grass began to yellow. The nymphs who had been with Persephone saw the earth close. They heard her screams fade into nothing. They saw the ground seal itself as if nothing had happened. And then they ran. They ran to find Demeter. Demeter had felt it too. A mother knows. Even a goddess. Perhaps especially a goddess. She had been somewhere else when it happened. doing her divine work, blessing crops, ensuring harvests. But the moment Persephone vanished, Demeter felt something tear inside her. She dropped everything. She flew to the meadow. She found the wilted flowers, the crushed grass where the chariot had stood, but no Persephone. She called her daughter's name. She searched the meadow. She questioned the nymphs, who could only tell her that the earth had opened and a dark figure had taken her. They didn't know who. They didn't know where. Demeter began to search. For 9 days and 9 nights, Demeter wandered the earth. She didn't eat. She didn't drink. She didn't rest. She carried 2 torches, searching even through the darkness. She asked everyone she met, mortals, spirits, rivers, mountains. Had they seen her daughter? Did they know where she was? No one would answer. They were afraid of Hades, afraid of Zeus, afraid of getting involved in divine politics. The goddess of harvest walked among her own creations, begging for help, and no one would give it. On the 10th day, she found someone who would finally speak, Hecate, goddess of crossroads and magic. She had heard Persephone's screams. She hadn't seen the abductor, but she knew someone who might have. Helios, the sun. He sees everything. Together, Demeter and Hecate approached Helios as he drove his golden chariot across the sky. "Please," Demeter begged, "tell me who took my daughter." Helios looked at her with something like pity. He had seen. Of course he had seen. The sun sees all. "It was Hades," he said, "lord of the underworld. He took her to be his queen, and Zeus gave his blessing. Your daughter was given to your brother as a bride." Demeter's grief transformed. It became rage. She couldn't attack Hades. He was in his own realm, beyond her reach. She couldn't attack Zeus. He was king of the gods, too powerful to challenge directly. But she could do something else. She could stop. Demeter abandoned Olympus. She abandoned her divine duties. She took the form of an old woman and wandered the earth in disguise. And while she wandered, she did not work. The crops began to fail, not just in one field, everywhere. The goddess of harvest had withdrawn her blessing, and the earth responded. Wheat withered, corn rotted, orchards produced no fruit. Seeds planted in the ground simply lay there, dead, refusing to sprout. The first year, people blamed the weather. The second year, they began to starve. Famine spread across the earth. Humans died. Animals died. The world began to empty of life. And still Demeter wandered. Still she grieved. Still she refused to let anything grow. The gods began to panic. If all the mortals died, who would worship them? Who would offer sacrifices? Who would build temples? They sent messengers to Demeter. Iris, goddess of rainbows. Hermes, messenger of the gods. One by one, the Olympians tried to convince her to relent. Demeter refused. "Give me back my daughter," she said. "Until Persephone returns, nothing will grow. Let the world die. Let the gods be forgotten. I don't care." Finally, Zeus was forced to act. He sent Hermes to the underworld, to Hades, to demand that Persephone be released. In the underworld, time moved differently. For Persephone, it had been both an eternity and an instant since her abduction. Hades had not harmed her. He had given her a throne beside his own. He had treated her with respect, even honor. He called her his queen. He showed her the wonders of his realm, the rivers, the fields, the palace of black stone. But she was still a prisoner. She missed the sun. She missed her mother. She missed the feeling of grass beneath her feet and wind in her hair. She had cried. She had raged. She had begged to be released. Hades had refused, not cruelly, almost sadly, as if he knew this was wrong but couldn't bear to let her go. "You will learn to love it here," he told her. "You will be queen of everything below. Is that not enough?" It wasn't. Nothing he offered was enough. But Persephone was trapped, and slowly, terribly, she began to adapt. When Hermes arrived with Zeus's command, Hades did not argue. He could have. The underworld was his domain. Zeus had no authority there. The three brothers had divided the cosmos equally. In his own realm, Hades was absolute. But Hades agreed to release Persephone. Perhaps he knew he couldn't keep her forever. Perhaps he saw what her absence was doing to the earth. Perhaps, in his own way, he loved her enough to let her go. But before she left, he did one thing. He offered her food, a pomegranate, the fruit of the dead. Its seeds were ruby red, glistening in the darkness. "You must be hungry," he said. "You've barely eaten since you arrived. Please, just a few seeds, before your journey." Persephone was hungry. She was exhausted. She was about to return to her mother, to the sun, to everything she had missed. What harm could a few seeds do? She ate them. Some myths say 3 seeds, some say 6, some say 7. It doesn't matter how many. What matters is that she ate food of the underworld, and that changed everything. There was a law, an ancient law, older than the gods themselves. Anyone who consumed food in the realm of the dead was bound to that realm. They could not leave permanently. They belonged to the underworld. Persephone had eaten the seeds. When she arrived on the surface, when Demeter embraced her daughter for the first time in what felt like years, the joy was short-lived. Hermes delivered the news. Persephone had eaten. She was bound. She would have to return. Demeter's rage returned, worse than before. She would destroy everything. She would let the world burn. Zeus was forced to negotiate. A compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year with her mother. The number of months varied by the telling. Some say 6 months. Some say 8. Some say it matched the number of seeds she ate. During this time, Demeter would be happy. The earth would flourish. Crops would grow. Flowers would bloom. This became spring and summer. But for the other part of the year, Persephone would return to the underworld, to Hades, to her throne of black stone. During this time, Demeter would grieve. The earth would reflect her sorrow. Plants would wither. Leaves would fall. The world would grow cold and barren. This became autumn and winter. The seasons themselves were born from this arrangement. Every year, Persephone descends. Every year, her mother mourns. Every year, the world dies a little. And every year, Persephone returns, and the world comes back to life. But here's the question the myths never quite answer. What did Persephone want? In the original stories, she is taken against her will. She is a victim, a prize, an object passed between male gods without her consent. But some versions hint at something more complicated. Did she eat those seeds by accident, or did she know what she was doing? Some scholars believe she chose to eat them, that after her time in the underworld, she had begun to change, that she had found power in the darkness, that she didn't want to return to being Demeter's innocent daughter forever. As queen of the underworld, she was feared, respected. She had authority over the dead themselves. She decided the fates of souls. She was no longer a girl picking flowers. She was a goddess of death, Perhaps she ate the seeds to ensure she could return, to ensure she wouldn't be trapped in the sunlight forever, to ensure she would always have her kingdom below. We'll never know for certain. The myths are ambiguous. They can be read either way. But what we do know is this: Persephone became something more than she was. She went into the earth as a maiden. She emerged as a queen. Hades and Persephone's relationship is the strangest love story in Greek mythology. It began with abduction, with violence, with a girl screaming as she was dragged into darkness, but it didn't stay that way. Over time, the myths show them as partners, equals, almost. Hades deferred to Persephone. He respected her judgment. He didn't take other lovers, unlike his brothers. When Orpheus descended to beg for his wife Eurydice's return, it was Persephone who convinced Hades to agree. She wept at Orpheus's music. She remembered what it was like to be separated from someone you loved. When Heracles came to capture Cerberus, Persephone helped negotiate the terms. When Pirithous and Theseus came to kidnap her, yes, someone actually tried to steal Hades' wife, Hades trapped them in chairs of forgetfulness. But when Heracles came to rescue Theseus, Persephone advocated for mercy. She was not a passive queen. She was not a prisoner anymore. She ruled. There's something almost tragic about Hades. Of all the gods, he was the most faithful, the most honest, the most consistent. He didn't lie. He didn't trick. When he made a promise, he kept it. When he made a deal, he honored it. He took Persephone without consent. That cannot be excused. That was a violation, a crime, an act of terrible selfishness. But after that initial sin, he treated her well. He loved her in his way. He gave her power. He gave her respect. And she eventually may have loved him back. Or at least she chose to stay. Half the year, she could have remained with her mother. But she always returned to the darkness, to her throne, to him, the god of death and the goddess of spring, the king of endings and the queen who began as a beginning. Together, they ruled over everything that dies. And strangely, in that kingdom of shadows, they may have had the most stable marriage on Olympus. What do these stories tell us? Zeus was a predator who faced no consequences. Hera was a victim who became a victimizer. And Hades? Hades was something harder to define. He committed a terrible act. He stole a girl from her mother. He dragged her into darkness against her will. But he also, uniquely among the Greek gods, seemed capable of growth, of partnership, of something resembling genuine love. The Greeks didn't worship Hades out of affection. They feared him. They avoided his name. They turned their faces away when they made offerings to him. But they also understood him. Death isn't evil. It's inevitable. And Hades, for all his flaws, represented that truth honestly. He didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. He didn't seduce with lies. He didn't punish the innocent out of jealousy. He simply was what he was, the Lord of the dead, the King of the inevitable. And in the end, everyone came to him, heroes and cowards, saints and sinners, kings and slaves. They all crossed the river. They all passed Cerberus. They all entered his realm. And Hades, on his throne of black stone, with Persephone at his side, received them all. That was his nature. That was his duty. That was his eternity. The Greek gods were not heroes. Zeus was a rapist who ruled through fear. Hera was a victim who destroyed other victims. And Hades was an abductor who built a marriage in the dark. These were not beings to admire, they were beings to survive. The ancient Greeks understood this. They didn't worship their gods out of love. They worshipped them out of necessity, out of fear, out of the knowledge that ignoring a god was far more dangerous than honoring one. These myths weren't bedtime stories about good triumphing over evil. They were warnings, explanations, ways of understanding a world that was often cruel and rarely fair. Why do the seasons change? Because a mother grieves for her stolen daughter. Why do innocent people suffer? Because the gods are petty and jealous and cruel. Why does death come for everyone? Because someone has to rule the underworld, and he's very good at his job. These were the original myths, the real stories, before they were softened for children, before they were sanitized for movies, before anyone decided to make them safe. The gods were monsters, and the Greeks knew it. They told these stories anyway, not because they were comfortable, but because they were true. True to the human experience of living in a world where power is often abused, where innocence is often punished, where the best you can hope for is to avoid divine attention. If you've stayed with me this long, thank you. There are more stories to tell. Norse gods who sacrificed themselves for wisdom, Egyptian rituals that guided the dead through darkness, Japanese spirits that haunted the living. The old myths are waiting. They've been waiting for thousands of years. And they'll be here whenever you're ready. Until next time, sleep well.